So today we're going to be talking about a very pertinent topic about the immune system. And so as always, I'm really excited to share information that you can use later today in your next meal to support and optimize your health. So I have a variety of slides, some of which are very technical, I would say. So I'm always trying to kind of balance between giving more scientific information if that's valuable to you, but also balancing that with very practical takeaways. And so hopefully you'll find a combination of both. And for some of the slides that are a little text heavy, that's just so that when the information is shared, it's something that you can reference and resource. So I just want to start by sharing a little bit about who I am so you can better understand the lens in which I'm sharing this information. So I'm a naturopathic physician here in Portland, and I'm actually in my clinic where I see patients as a primary care provider. In fact, I had patients before the presentation and I have some following. But I'm also a certified nutrition specialist, which is really to say it's my favorite tool to use when working with patients. So kind of the concept of food as medicine is often utilized. So whether it's helping with managing symptoms or condition specific. And I've also been a BGF partner in a variety of different ways over the past several years. And so it's something that I feel really aligns with both my personal and professional interests. And that is, I do have a family member with Parkinson's. And as Iris was sharing, the emphasis of the foundation to provide resources around nutrition and exercise and mental health is really kind of the wheelhouse in which I operate as a physician. So I've listed those six. These are the principles of naturopathic medicine, if you're not familiar, and a lot of it has to do with treating the whole person. And we will work through that today. And so that's to show you 2Be Well is the clinic I work at, and then Natural Sports Medicine is my own business where I work with individuals online. So a little bit more about where we're going to be going with this presentation today. And so this is a little bit of an outline. We're going to do a little bit of science together. So we're going to dive into both immunology, then some microbiology, and then really focusing on nutrition, which includes both the food, but also botanical medicine, which is herbs and plants that are used often as culinary herbs that kind of also combine into the nutrition umbrella. And then we will have the question and answer time at the end. And so I certainly want to make sure I leave time for that. So I might rush through slides if needed to be able to be more available for that. Okay, so let's start with immunology. So you might be familiar with some aspects, but sometimes it's good to just have a more zoomed out picture of what does this system entail. And so there are different organs that are involved with your immune system. So that's the spleen, also the thymus. Then there's also different systems. So there's the entire lymphatic system, which includes those lymph nodes. And if you're ever looking at these body diagrams, it's usually represented in that green mapping. So similar to the circulatory system, but that's the lymph system. There's also something called the complement system, which is much more of at a cellular level. And then bone marrow, which contributes to some of these white blood cell development. So this is just kind of a big picture, so you have an understanding of all the places and kind of focal points in which your immune system operates. Next, we kind of we're going to dive into a little bit of what are the cells that we are going to be kind of referencing throughout and the functions that they have. And this is a graph that I think can be helpful in understanding. There's different kind of lines of cells that have different functions and operate in specific ways. The one I'll highlight from this slide you'll see is there's an eosinophil, and that is actually one cell that responds from the immune system more to allergies. So the eosinophils are kind of the army that shows up, and maybe that's responding to Seasonal allergies, if you have pollen, grass, or tree, if you react to that, or perhaps cats or dogs, that's when you have symptoms of a runny nose and itchy eyes and sneezing. In part, it's because that eosinophil, the elevation of that in the system. So this is, again, a little bit technical, but just kind of want to talk through a little bit. The other part of the immune system that's important to kind of separate is that there are kind of two operating systems. One we call innate or non-specific. This is the fast-acting, ready-to-go system. And we also include different things that help with the immune system, such as physical barriers like your skin. And then there's also chemical barriers like lysozymes, which are actually within your eyes that help prevent any sort of pathogens, which we'll talk about later too. So we're thinking bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites, anything out there that could cause illness or disrupt how your body should optimally function. So hopefully this is just kind of hoping to categorize some of the ways that your immune system is organized, but also to share this, how sophisticated and complicated it all is at the same time. So the innate cells, we're thinking of a few categories, and mast cells is one, phagocytes, and this is what and also the macrophages, and what they're really responsible for doing is really kind of like devouring and gobbling up. There's also neutrophils, and the NK is natural killer cells. I've underlined macrophages because they're also responsible for, if this term is familiar to you, different protein that are used as messengers to communicate that are called cytokines. And macrophages are responsible for that. So sometimes the cytokines are used to message to, it's kind of like, an example would be if like the police are pulling over a car, or if there was an accident, perhaps there was something happened, and they put kind of, well, there's the siren could be part of that alert system, or if they put kind of flagging signals out, so that way it's known, okay, we're all going to go to this place and take care of this situation. The neutrophils, I won't play the video in the presentation, but you can do so on your own. But this is a very, it's definitely like a Pac-Man, but it shows sort of in real time how the neutrophils, which are the most abundant type of innate non-specific immune cells in the body, will just be chasing bacteria to consume them. And so they're non-specific because they basically will just go for anything that seems like it's a problem. So they are fast acting, but they're not going to be very specific to different types of viruses or bacteria, if that makes sense. So this is, again, the non-specific fast acting. And I also wanted to give you this vocabulary because as we jump into the nutrition component, we'll see how different nutrients will support specific immune function, and it usually is reflected in identifying some of these immune cells that are being regulated or supported. I hope everyone's kind of stay with me, it gets better. The second component of the immune system is then the adaptive or acquired. And so this is going to this usually shows up after 96 hours. And these are all different types of cells. This dendritic cell is what's represented, but they are what will then create the more specific way of attacking the body after they've identified what virus. So we can even just say like the flu. So if it sees this virus, it's able to, it breaks it apart and it kind of identifies aspects that make it unique. And then it kind of shares that information with other parts of the immune system. So then they can create a more specific, I know army sometimes is utilized within the immune system that is ready to better identify if that flu virus shows up again. It can be very specific in managing and taking care of it, if that's helpful. I know antibodies are probably a big buzzword right now too, and those are very specific parts of the immune system that then can connect with those unique features of different pathogens. And this shows a little bit more of like how that process works and some of the cells that are involved with basically, as you'll see, it's this process where there's been an encounter with maybe a flu virus. Parts of it are identified, extracted to then create these antibodies that can be considered a way to better like battle with the flu virus once it's encountered again. Okay, thanks for sticking with me. That's the cellular details. But in general, the big thought is really like, what does your immune system do? And so one of the biggest roles that it has is to identify what is not self or not you. And this is this idea of tolerance. Sometimes this shows up as an overreaction. So sometimes allergies can be part of that. It's also really important for wound healing. And so that's probably the most common experience that we can understand how the immune system works is in, if you had any sort of cut, the way that the body responds to heal and prevent infection, hopefully. And so that includes those neutrophils showing up first right away and supporting that immune function. Another aspect of the immune system is also to be able to identify when cells in the body aren't really functioning well like they should. And this is this process of basically, it's apoptosis. So it's this idea of kind of cellular destruction. And it's a way of your body kind of doing cellular cleanup. Sometimes the process is called autophagy, which literally means to kind of like consume, auto self, and phage is to kind of like to eat or consume. So it's this idea of kind of like processing, and I think of it as cellular cleanup or kind of taking the garbage out. And you want to make sure that your body is able to do that. And that's not regulated well. That's when we also see problems in different pathologies. And then lastly, what we'll be talking a little bit more about today is this infection management. So to mitigate any sort of virus, bacteria, fungi, or parasite, and how that impacts the body to be able to take care of and eliminate things that present in the body that can be harmful. Okay, we did it. We did immunology. I did want to highlight, I'm not going to go into a lot of this, but I did want to highlight, so for the sake of this audience, with the Parkinson's being a consideration, is that there are some linking studies to show some of the correlations of autoimmune or immune dysregulation with some of the Parkinson's pathogenesis, which means how it can be like developed and progress. And so I think I just wanted to highlight that to say that it is something that I'm excited to kind of share today, so that it's on your radar to optimize that immune system as best you can, in knowing that there are some correlations. And we have yet to know really the details of how that can show up with either symptoms or what some of those implications are. We're just seeing now that there are associations. Okay, a little bit about bugs, and then we'll go into the fun stuff. So the pathogens are identified in these different categories. So bacteria, we'll be highlighting a lot of virus because it just is that time of the year, but it's also something that seems very pertinent to discuss at this time. Yeast can be pathogenic, but it's also one that is considered an opportunistic. And that's to say you should have a normal amount of candida as a yeast. And it's an opportunistic, so in the event that it's able to replicate more, so that's usually, it gets a lot of sugar in the diet, that feeds the yeast, and that can present with some types of symptoms, but it's not in and of itself an illness-causing microbe. Is just when it's out of balance. And then mold and parasites, and those are things that can show up in different symptoms. Okay, so a little bit of how they work to better understand why we're going to be using some of the nutrients to interface with this. So viruses are unique in that they are the burglars. They're the burglars in that they will attach to the cell. They kind of sneak in, they steal some of the good stuff, and they basically use it to then replicate, and then it will be released. And over time, they can change and mutate, which we're also all kind of learning about at this time, right? So this is a little bit of how the process of the virus can work in the body. And then we can kind of understand some of the steps in which we would want to kind of create an interference or intervention to prevent that from occurring to support the body. So the pathogens can create this infection, illness, and disease, and often they're treated with antibiotics and antivirals. But what is exciting about what I'm sharing today is that what the problem with repeatedly using those types of therapies is that it can lead to resistance. So it can be basically the bugs can basically survive through even taking a course of antibiotics. And so the goal is to share a little bit more about how we can actually modulate or change how the host, meaning us, our human body, our immune response in a way to support and prevent that infection, illness, or disease as well. So it's becoming a more prevalent conversation within medicine is the need to look outside of just pharmaceuticals. And I do use pharmaceuticals as well, but I would say just being mindful and when it's appropriate to use and to consider other options when that's an option. And this is a text heavy one, but I really just wanted to highlight then. So now we're going to try and bridge these conversations is really just understanding how nutrition and immune system are very connected. And so this is showing up for clinical, practical, and public health importance. And so we'll be talking a little bit more about these specific nutrients in future slides. So to start, I want to share a little bit about, so we're going to go through 10. So just to see if you're taking notes or if you have questions or you're wondering, I'm going to be highlighting 10 different nutrition considerations, and we'll talk a little bit about what they can do and how they operate within the body, and then what foods they're found in, just so you have an idea of what to expect as we move into food as medicine. So vitamin C is probably one that you're familiar with. Maybe it's considering drinking, the orange juice with a cold or thinking about oranges, but there's also other foods that are high vitamin C options that we'll share next. But these are some of the very specific cellular ways in which they work. And what studies have shown is that it can really, that high dose vitamin C can really decrease flu and cold symptoms, which is an exciting thing to consider using right away. I would also say, again, this is not a treatment recommendation. These are considerations. One thing to think about with vitamin C is that your body will go to what's called bowel tolerance. And so while we want to consider high dose vitamin C, the GI tract will usually show signs of if you're taking too much by having loose stool. But it's also to say that the body, if you are in the process or just starting to get sick, starting to fight something off, the body's tolerance for the vitamin C is also elevated because it's utilizing it as a high antioxidant. It's kind of utilizing it. So it can have a higher dose. You may have heard of, or if you haven't, is that there's actually IV high dose vitamin C. And sometimes that can be used even in hospital settings. So as some of the research there has indicated. So where do you find it? So again, citrus fruits are definitely one of the more popular, but you can consider bell peppers. There's some berries, but also things like broccoli, tomatoes, and kale, as well as snow peas. So those are foods that you can think about incorporating in your meals, especially this fall and winter, to support your vitamin C levels and overall support your immune function. So it probably wasn't too surprising to hear that vitamin C was one of the first listed. The next is vitamin D. And so this is sometimes considered the sunshine vitamin. And if any of you are tuning in from the Pacific Northwest, the summer is a great time, but as soon as fall and winter hits, it's not as much sun as around. And so it might be a good thing to be considering how to better incorporate from foods and potentially consider supplementation that you would want to talk to your provider about. So the vitamin D, actually, it is absorbed through the skin, but it goes through the liver and even the kidneys to then be converted to this active form called 25-OH. And you can measure, those levels can be measured by a blood test. And so that can be helpful to see if you are deficient, meaning you don't have enough vitamin D, or to better give you a specific dosage of vitamin D that's appropriate for your health. So what the studies have shown is that it can increase risk of infection. And a lot of these are what's called observational studies. And one of the largest studies that I found was 18,833 subjects, I believe it was, that they identified an increased risk of the URI as an upper respiratory infection, which are most commonly caused by viruses, whenever the vitamin D levels were less than 30. And so that's an observation that has been very consistent in research, is showing basically how low levels of vitamin D increase risk of infection overall, and especially for upper respiratory. So where can you find some vitamin D? Well, fatty fish are a really great source. So those are going to be salmon and tuna. And sardines can also be considered part of the fatty fish, but I think they're a good one to highlight on their own. Eggs, mushrooms, and then caviar. So those are, again, some vitamin D foods that you can consider to support overall health. And depending on where you're tuning in from and your sun exposure, it is good to consider appropriately changing and adjusting either the foods or supplementation based on your sun exposure that supports that vitamin D. Next is glutathione, or in combination is NAC, which is N-acetylcysteine. Glutathione is known as kind of the king or queen of antioxidants. It's kind of the major antioxidant that works within the immune system. And NAC is what's called a precursor. So sometimes people will either eat foods that have high glutathione content, or might consider supplementing with NAC to support glutathione. And the biggest group of foods that contain glutathione are these cruciferous vegetables, and those are going to be what's pictured there. And so there's a lot of those cabbage and cauliflower, Swiss chard, and then in addition, mushrooms are showing up again, garlic and onions, asparagus, and then spinach. So these are another reason to add vegetables to your meals as best you can. And as I've shared in the past, I think that spinach is the most versatile of the vegetables, because if you don't like the taste or flavor, spinach can be more readily kind of disguised in a smoothie, or perhaps you can try, whether it's, if you don't like raw spinach salads, perhaps maybe it's sauteed or steamed, or part of an omelet, or something you can incorporate in soups now that we're getting into the fall and winter. But these are some of the top foods to help with that antioxidant support. Next, we're going to talk a little bit more about the quercetin is considered a polyphenol, or like an ingredient within the food. So this isn't a nutrient as much as it is, it's also an anti-inflammatory and antioxidant. And it's something that I also have found to be really helpful for allergies. So immune system, but also allergies. And the foods that it's found in mostly are going to be the onion and apples. So this time of year, you can think about adding those apples, but also some of, again, those green leafy vegetables like the kale and spinach. Again, some of the other cruciferous vegetables showing up, so broccoli. And so you can think about kind of some of these foods that overlap in a lot of these categories. And sometimes that's why they're deemed kind of like the superfoods, is just because they have so many health benefits that they're really worth eating. The next is a trace mineral called zinc. And I thought this was just helpful to connect back to some of the earlier slides about lymphocytes and different cells and the process of the phagocytosis or the phagocytes, and just to see how significant it is in how those actually operate within the body. And so the zinc is going to be found in, again, a seasonal pumpkin seeds, but also different beans, quinoa, again, spinach showing up, and even garlic. So thinking about, again, how do you incorporate some of these foods to support and optimize that immune system, incorporating zinc-rich foods that are high in supporting especially that process of that phagocytosis, and really kind of the army in a process of kind of battling whatever you might be interfacing with. The next trace mineral is selenium. And the number one food source for selenium is Brazil nuts. And so some people will even eat maybe just like 2 Brazil nuts a day just to get their daily dose. But there's other foods that also contain selenium. And I also am highlighting some of the specific foods that are used in the recipe that will be revealed soon. So stay tuned. But so some of these meat, but also then seafood options, but also pistachios. Another consideration is, this also goes back to that gut health that we've talked about in that first series, if you were able to join. And these are any sort of fermented foods, which are definitely more common in other parts of the world. So a lot of the foods that we have available to us are derived from, different cultures, but kimchi or sauerkraut, miso was featured in our first recipe, so you can check that out on the website. Tempeh is a fermented lentils. So if you are a vegetarian, that can be a good option, but also just any fermented pickled vegetables can be helpful. And these are those good gut bugs to support the GI tract. And to better connect it into how is the gut connected to immune health, is this very specific part of the immune system. And so what we're looking at here is a cross section of the intestines, the large intestine. And so you'll see that is the villi that are part of what increases surface area for absorption in the gut. But right underneath there, right below, is what's called your Peyer's patch. And that's really where the immune system and lymph is a big part of kind of protecting your body from what you're going to be consuming. So it's really important to think about how to support gut, lungs, and skin, as those are sort of your physical barriers to interfacing with any pathogens. And this is, again, a slide to highlight the vitamin D in more specific detail of kind of what is it actually doing, and then selenium as a highlighted trace mineral to show how it can be involved in very specific kind of cell lines. And some of the outcomes of the research, as you can imagine, a lot of research has been going on because of the pandemic. And so there's been a lot of interest in learning what can be helpful in that way. And you can use this as a reference to some of that research. And then a little bit more is botanical medicine. I just want to highlight 3 for you today. And that is the first, we've seen it listed as actually a food source for some of those nutrients, but in and of itself, garlic, which is known as Allium sativum, is an immune modulating. So that is to say it helps with kind of seesawing, so it can help support the immune system, but it also can help suppress the immune system when it can be overreactive. And that can be seen most commonly in an autoimmune picture. But it's also an anti-inflammatory and it's antimicrobial. And when you see antimicrobial, that's the umbrella that means it's kind of battles and it's effective against it's antibacterial, it's antiviral, and it's antifungal. So that's usually antimicrobial is going to cover all those 3 bases. So that's a good term to be familiar with as it relates to some of the functions of foods or botanicals. And you may have heard of it before, but allicin is one of the active ingredients in the garlic. And the way, we'll take this to the kitchen real quick, the way that you really can optimize The allicin is by crushing garlic and letting it sit for a little while before using it in your foods. So if you're going to be really using that food as medicine concept, that would be one strategy if you aren't currently doing that. Next is ginger. So it's known as Gingiber officinale, and it's a great both antioxidant and anti-inflammatory. There's been research to show these different active compounds, especially the gingerols, which we'll get to shortly as it relates to immune support. This time of year, ginger can be really nice because it's also a warming herb. And so it like physically makes you a little bit warmer, and it can be part of maybe a golden milk recipe if you've seen that. It can be added to your smoothie. It can be tea. And so if you're not familiar with the ginger root that's pictured there below, it can be used, you can slice it, or you can find ginger powder to utilize in your own homes. And then lastly is another botanical medicine with a very specific mushroom called chaga. And some call it the king of mushrooms, but I think it has to do with maybe the country that you're in. But again, it's an immune modulator, again, a balancer and a huge antioxidant. It supports those cytokines that we talked a little bit about, so those protein messengers. And what's in the mushrooms that makes them medicinal mushrooms is the beta-D glucans. And these are not hallucinogenic in any way. These would be something that can be capsules or tea. It's usually a water extraction, so you get the medicine out of the mushrooms. And as you'll see in that last line, it enhances the line of cells, the macrophages, and natural killer cell function. So those are some of the specific ways that the ingredient of the beta-D glucan in chaga mushrooms can help. So lastly, I just wanted to kind of, again, put this together. If we reference again how viruses work, and now combining with some of the nutrition and nutrients we've talked about and how this can help in a specific ways. So one of the things that we want to think about is blocking the virus from binding to the cell to begin with. And these are three considerations. So the ginger, the garlic, and vitamin D have been shown to support blocking that virus from binding to the cell to begin with. So basically, it's kind of like a really good security around the home to prevent a burglar from even coming in. The next would be to help with preventing it from kind of getting into the cell or from kind of stealing. And so this is the zinc, quercetin, vitamin D, and NAC. Again, that's N-acetylcysteine. And then the ways that it can support the body from, again, immune modulating to support the immune system from having like the perfect amount of reaction so that it doesn't cause harm by overreacting, or it's just not quite, it's like the, security system is, the battery's gone, so it's not going off in any way. And so those are going to be the quercetin. Vitamin A, we didn't really discuss. NAC, we discussed the probiotic foods. And then lastly, just to mention that anti-inflammatory diet, very similar to Mediterranean diet, which is very much highlighted through the BGF website, their recipes and other kind of guidelines around that. So any of those recipes are very helpful and are typically part of that anti-inflammatory Mediterranean kind of scale. And then omega-3s, which are connected to a lot of the fatty fish that are also part of the vitamin D picture too. One other thing I wanted to mention here, I want to do a time check, we'll be finishing up here shortly, is one way to measure immune function. So this is something that you can do with blood work. So a CBC will show you, as you'll see, this is a sample report of a CBC with differential, will show you white blood cell counts. Later down, you'll see neutrophils, lymphocytes, monocytes, eosinophils, and on to see if you have enough of an army prepared, or if perhaps it'll show if you're battling something, if there's something a little bit elevated and how to manage that. You can measure IgA and IgG, which is a kind of a different topic, but those are different immunoglobulins. Vitamin D is something you can measure. histamine, especially if you have high allergy, that can be measured, and CRP is an inflammatory marker. So these are a comprehensive list of considerations for doing some lab work for diagnostic purposes or to better specify any sort of recommendations or treatments. So summary slide, these are the top 10 nutrients, trace minerals, and botanicals for immune support that I'm sharing with you today. And lastly, this is a way for you to stay connected with me or reach out if you do have any questions or concerns. I do want to make sure that I'm available to you. And we will now open up